Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Scholars Table. Today's episode is special. If you're an international student planning to study in the US, this episode could save you time, money, and a couple of heartbreaks. We are cutting through the noise on one of the most misunderstood part of the US of the graduate school application journey. That is the US visa process. Joining us today is a former US diplomat and a visa consular officer who has adjudicated thousands of student visa cases worldwide. He's now the president and general counsel, BDV Solutions, and the co-founder of Argo Visa. He has worked inside embassies around the world, made thousands of visa decisions, and now helps students avoid costly mistakes before their interview even begins. So today we are breaking it all down, the timelines, the documents, interview day secrets, and the biggest myth that gets students denied. So let's get started. So our guest today is Mr. Christopher Richardson. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's been a lot trying to get you on this program, so we truly appreciate your time and
No,
honoring our invitation.
no problem. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, for those who are seeing you for the first time, could you briefly introduce yourself? Your career and a little bit of your agency or your consultant firm.
Sure. My name is Chris Richardson. As you mentioned, I was a former visa officer, and now I'm the president and general counsel of BDV Solutions. And within that company is another company called Argo, which I founded. And the idea was to bring the information from the visa interview to visa applicants all over the world. Anyone who's been through a visa interview knows how difficult and opaque it can be. And so, what I really wanted to do was to make sure people had the knowledge they needed to make informed decisions about their visa potential and possibilities.
Awesome, awesome. So I want us to dive straight into some of the questions I have.
Mhm.
So let's start from the preparation and the timing. Um, when should a student start preparing for their visa process after receiving the admission?
They should start even before they apply for their admission, because really, what makes a good student applicant is what makes a good student, right? You're
Yeah.
prepared for the interview, you've thought this through, you understand why you're applying for the school, and you can explain what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? And so even before the admission process, when you're looking at applying for the school, you really have to think, you know, is the school a good fit for me? Am I using and deciding this school based on logic and rationality? And I'm not just doing it based on this is something everybody else is doing or my family's
Hmm.
telling me to do it. So you should be able to argue and explain why you're applying for the school, in general to yourself, but also to the visa officer. And you should do that even before you get admitted to the school.
Awesome. So yeah, so as you said, the preparation before the preparation for the visa interview begins even before you start applying for graduate
That's
school,
right.
trying
That's
to
right.
align
Mhm.
your goals and your vision to make sure that everything
Yeah,
is in sync. Okay.
that's
So
right.
what would you say are some of the most important documents to have ready when you're going for the interview? I know, like you have to get hold of your F1, your I-20, and your admission letter. But what are some of the important documents that you think applicants should must bring to the interview session?
They really need to, well, it's less about the documents themselves because the officers don't really care about the documents or look at the documents. It really is about, are you actually prepared for this interview, right? And I use this example that, I served in Nigeria, and any document could be faked, right? Like I had documents from people who were like, "Oh, here's a birth certificate from like the 1940s and 1930s." I'm like, "Really? This isn't even real, right?" And because every document, can be faked, as an officer, you really are looking for how this person actually interviews, And I think so many visa applicants, they get caught up in this idea of what document to bring, that they hide behind the document, really you need to be able to explain to this officer why you're applying to this school, and use and be able to explain it in a logical, rational way, so people understand why exactly you're doing this. The documents themselves aren't important because officers don't read the documents. When I was a visa officer, I interviewed hundreds of people. I didn't have time to read all these documents, and so you really can't be thinking about what the documents are. You really need to be thinking about what am I going to say more than
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
Yeah. So what are some of the common mistakes that students make in how they fill the application form or the visa application document? That's the DS-160.
They may not be as honest about what actually happened. Sometimes they don't always tell everything about what they did and how they did it and where do they go, and there might be even things where they don't disclose they had family members. You have to be very, very honest in this application, and you have to tell everything because the officers probably already know it, and it's better that you outline it. But a lot of people will acknowledge that stuff in the application, but not prepared when they get asked about it. So if you write on the application that, hey, I got a mom and a dad in the US, you should be prepared to talk about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you write that you've been denied multiple times, you should be prepared to talk about that. So many times people will write stuff in their application and totally not know or be prepared how to respond to it when the officer inevitably asks you about it. And as officers, we're going to ask you about it because it flashes red, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
from our perspective, when we see the DS-160 on the screen, it's bright red, it's bright orange. And so, we kind of can't miss it. So, it's definitely going to be a question.
Okay. 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 Thank you so much for that. And I think one aspect of the whole process that is actually nerve wracking is the interview day. No matter how legit your documents are, no matter how strong you are
Hmm.
as a candidate, that nerve kicks in and everybody gets a share of it. So, what would you say students should realistically expect during a typical F1 visa interview?
They should expect it to be short because I think a lot of people go in there thinking that this is going to be a long drama talking, and they expect 30, 40 minutes of really, no one has time for that as a visa officer. Like I probably
Mm-hmm.
got 5 minutes as a visa officer to really look at this case and work on this case. 5, 10 minutes tops, right? And so it's going to fly by. And I think people are also shocked by the fact the officers don't look at the documents because again, they don't have time to like look at your documents, right? And so um, you only have 5 minutes to sell this, right? And I tell people, think of it as speed dating, right? When I don't know if you ever do those things where you go into a room, you hit a clock, you got 5 minutes, tell someone about you, and you have to convince them to date you or not. That's all this is, right? You need to be thinking, and when you go on a speed date, you don't sit there and like throw documents at the other person, right? You got to talk. It's the same mentality here. You really can't be thinking, oh, well, I'm going to throw this document or that document at them. You really need to be focusing on what am I actually saying to this officer to sell myself to this officer.
So how can students applicants prepare their response to common questions? I know like uh, there are some questions they may be asked. So how do students or what do you suggest is the best way to actually prepare for these obvious questions? That
Mhm.
wouldn't also sound like you've just rehearsed your response.
Um, the best way to prepare is just to know what you're talking about. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I really do think a lot of people, they write out things, they try to memorize it, they try to like think, oh, I'm just going to throw this document at the officer. And it really isn't that. You just have to know it, right? And be honest with it too, right? Like, don't, if you applied for the school because the trees are high, well, that's not a good reason to apply for a school, and you will be denied. But like you should just be honest about it, right? Like, or be able to like articulate, why this is why tree height is so important to me in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
People just need to talk more about what it is that actually it's like a conversation, not like an interrogation in that way.
Okay. So, what would you say some of the most common questions they should expect? I mean, for the students that you've interviewed, what is like the top three questions that you would definitely be asking them?
Oh, okay. So one, the first question is, why do you want to go to this school,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've heard great answers. I've heard terrible answers, right? Like literally, like I want to see snow. It's not a reason to go to a school. You're not going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to just see the snow. Just fly someplace and see the snow. Um, or oh, my family. No, you really need to be thinking. So what I'm looking for as an officer when I ask this question is, does this person have a logical step-by-step analysis as to why they made the decision to go to this school?
Mm-hmm.
So if you tell me, well, I want to go to Houston Baptist or I want to go to College of Charleston here, I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask you, well, did you apply to any other schools? And I hope you're going to say yes. I applied to 3 or 4 different schools. I got into 3 schools or 2 schools, and I selected this one school because of X.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be linear and it has to be logical as to why you applied to this school. If you tell me I applied to no other schools, I'm like, what? Like that isn't normal. Like, why would you not apply to any other schools? No,
Yeah.
just because I've always loved Charleston Southern University. Like, no one always loves Charleston Southern University. Like, you have to have a reason for loving this one university, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you really got to factor that in as an officer, and as the applicant. Well, what is the real reasoning and rationale behind me applying to the school? So I want to see something linear. I want to
Mm-hmm.
see that you applied to 5 or 10 different schools, you narrowed it down, and you selected this one for that reason. So that's the first analysis you have to do. The second is going to be, well, how are you going to pay for the school, right? And if you are like, well, I have this great grand uncle who's going to do it, then be able to explain why that great grand uncle is going to spend all that money on you, right? Or I have savings, or my parents, or whatever. You have to be able to articulate that whoever is the source of money actually has that money and has a logical reason for giving you all that money to go study in the US. And then the third question is, what are you going to do with your degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if your answer is, and I will admit that I had a kid from Harvard once, who was applying to school in Harvard, and I asked him, well, what are you going to do with your degree? He's like, I'm living in America. And I'm like, I'm going to ask you again, what are you doing with your degree? He's like, I'm living in America. And I'm like, man, I'm going to ask you a third time, what are you doing with your degree? And he's like, are you deaf? I'm living in America. I'm gonna live up my life. This is a non-immigrant visa, the F1. That means that you
Yes.
cannot immigrate to the United States on this visa. And if you tell me as an officer, hey, I'm going to live in America, I have to deny your case because you've
Yes.
shown immigrant intent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what school you go to. Maybe he re-interviewed and got a better answer with that. But when you're answering that question, you really need to be thinking about, what is it I'm going to do in my home country, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how is this degree going to help me when I come back to my home country? And that's what you need to articulate to the officer. It can't be like, I plan on studying in America for 10 years, or I'm going to get a job in Houston working at X, Y, or Z. Because as an officer, I'm going to be like, oh, then you're not coming back home. So why would I send you to America? You can just stay here and do that right now, right? Like, or rather, like like you have to explain and think about, what is it and the reason and the rationale why I'm doing this. And if you can't
Mm-hmm.
explain it and articulate it, the officers are going to know and they're going to punish you for it.
Okay. I think you've summed up these questions pretty well. So
Hmm.
if I have to recap again, why graduate school or why this particular school, and then who's
Hmm.
paying for it, and
Yeah.
then what you need to do or what do you want to do after the program,
Ah,
or what do you intend to do with the degree?
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right. That's
and I think the first question when I first interviewed for my U.S. visa,
right. Mm-hmm.
um, I was coming to Johns Hopkins, but the consular officer asked me, "Did you apply to any other school?" And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Yes, I applied to Harvard, Yale. I got into all." And she was like, "So why did you choose Hopkins?" So I had the opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to really explain my rationale as to
Exactly.
why.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that truly
That's
makes
something
sense.
every officer is going to ask you. Did you
Mm-hmm.
apply to a bunch of schools? And why did you pick this one school? That's something we all ask as officers. That's like our little secret sauce.
Okay, so yeah, and I think you've given some hints about how to, or the ideal response that you would expect from
Mm-hmm.
a student, how to analyze these questions.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you say, or what should
Mm-hmm.
students not say during the interview? Like one mistake that automatically raises a red flag.
Oh my God. Like if the first thing out the gate is like a ridiculous answer as to why you want to apply to this school, like it's just no. Like literally if you're like, I'm going for the snow, I'm going for the trees, I'm going for like, or if you say something weird like, oh, I've heard Houston is really nice during the summers. No, it's not nice during the summers. It's absolutely terrible during the summers. Or I'm going to Maine because I like the winters. Like crazy stuff like that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like that'd be the first thing. The other thing I would warn about is people who only apply to one school. And that's very, very suspicious as an officer because nobody applies just to one thing, right? Like as a university, like when you're studying, you really are thinking about different schools in different locations. The fact that they only apply to one school is usually a red flag to officers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So not being able to justify
Hmm.
your rationale,
What
and then
rationale?
maybe applying to one school. Is there anything about the funding that raises a red flag?
Um, if it's like some random relative and you can't articulate why this random relative is paying for your education, or if it's some American and you are just like, oh, this is my friend, like what kind of friend pays like 20, $30,000 for you to like just live in America, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that for some of us, that is also a red flag. Like the relationship has to be logical. And the reason why whoever's paying for your school, if it's not you, is doing that has to be logical as well.
Okay. So during the interview day, how important is body language or confidence? Uh,
Very, 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 very important. If you come across as nervous or scared or antsy, the officers will pick up on that in a heartbeat. Because remember, the visa interview really is about the interview. It's not about the
mhm.
papers. It's how you present yourself. And if you go in there and you seem nervous and cagey, the officers are going to pick up on that. And they're going to just be like, I am afraid to give this person the visa because I don't know what their real intentions are.
Hmm. And is
Yeah.
it is it true that, I mean, we've heard this before. Uh, People think maybe the visa officers have already made up their mind before the interview starts. How true is it? Like, is it
Hmm.
possible for the visa officers to kind of do some checks before the interview day or before you arrive?
Usually no. No one has time for that. Like, unless it's like a really special case. Officers literally get like maybe 10 seconds before you actually come up to the window to look at your DS 160 to kind of figure out. Now, there is like if you I wouldn't say that people like are predetermining interviews, but I will say though that there are times as an officer when someone will come up to the window and they've had multiple denials where it's going to be very unlikely I'm going to give them a fair shot and actually give them the visa, right? Like I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty common among officers where it's just like you've had 10 denials, you've been trying and trying to get in America, coming back to my window, that's just an easy no. And it's really hard to overcome those no's once you get them.
Okay. But would you say it depends on a number of no's? There are I've spoken to a couple of people who kind of go in the first time, and I think something happens, they are denied, and
Hmm.
they rebook again, and they go, and luckily they get it. And there are
Yeah,
people too
that
who get
that's fairly rare. That's rare. It does happen, but that's rare though.
okay.
Most of the times, if you get that one denial, it's going to be hard to convince an officer to then give an issuance. That's just tough.
But Okay.
Okay.
for students who end up getting their their visas approved,
Hmm.
um, how should they prepare for when they land in the U.S. airport or the port of entry?
They should, with the same with the visa officers, just be prepared to tell CBP, the people at the border, the truth about what you're doing, why you're in the US. And generally, that stuff's pretty easy. The hard part is getting the visa interview, the visa itself. Once you get that, once you enter, you should be fine.
Okay. Are there like specific questions that may be asked at the border, that could cause
They
trouble, or is
will
the
probably
same?
they will ask questions if they do ask questions that reconfirm what you've already said. Right?
Hmm.
So if you tell the visa officer one thing, but then you tell CBP another, they're going to know because we have notes and we share those notes. And so you have to be really, really careful that whatever you're saying to the one, you better be consistent across the board.
Hmm. So, are there instances where a student maybe turn back at the port of
Oh yeah,
entry?
yeah, yep, yep. We get those every Monday morning. They're called turnaround reports. So we know when people get turned back around to go back to their home country.
Hmm.
That does
Okay.
happen. It's rare, but it does happen.
Okay. So, I know like there are so many misconceptions about these student visa processes. And I want us to
Hmm.
kind of go through some of these misconceptions so that, people get to really understand what the process truly is.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
so, w- what would you say are the some of the biggest myth that students believe about the visa process?
Um, that and I've said this before, and I keep hitting this point because it's such a common mistake. People really do think that their papers are going to save them. They think that their documents somehow, if they hide behind their documents as like a shield, that the officers are going to somehow think, okay, um, I can do this, and this is fine. Your documents are fine. Those documents they're just not important. Like the officers really don't care about your documents. They really, really care about your expertise and what you're saying in the interview, and less about what you're telling me. What documents you give me rather.
Okay. Okay. So, is there an advantage when it comes to the particular school you've been admitted to? So, for example, if someone is to be admitted to, say, Harvard, and another person is to be
Mhm,
admitted to a community college, is there an
mhm.
advantage that the person who has been admitted to Harvard is more likely to get a visa compared to the other person?
Like, is there more an advantage to applying to one school over the other school, or what are you
Um,
suggesting?
Okay, so let's say you've applied to multiple schools, like two people
Mhm.
apply to multiple schools. One person
Yeah.
get admitted to a, let's say, an Ivy League, and the other person
Mhm.
gets admitted to, let's say, a community level program. Is there an
Mhm.
advantage to the person who gets into Ivy League?
Yes. I think that then, I mean, it's just like anything else in life, right? Like, if your school is a really, well-known and regarded school, the officers feel more comfortable and confident that that decision that they make is the right one.
Hmm.
So I think that for the officers, they're like, oh, okay, then that's fine. I hate to put it that way, but really, it's just like, well, listen, if you're going to go to John Hopkins or Harvard or Yale or something, officer, well, maybe not in this day and age, but it used to be that if you went to the Harvard or Yale, officers were like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Like, just go ahead and issue you the visa, so long as you don't like royally mess up and answer
Yes.
questions really, really wrongly."
Hmm.
Um, and well, whereas opposed if you go to like if you go to school to learn English, for example, like right, like we get these cases in Nigeria and even in Ghana where someone's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to English class. I'm going to English speaking school."
Okay. The other myth, or let's say the other point of clarification is, um, for individuals who have some level of funding from their sponsoring institution, usually have a higher chance of getting approved compared to someone who is self-funding the entire cost.
Yeah, if you get funding from the school, officers think that's more secure, and they believe that they can trace that source of funding.
Okay.
People who self-fund, officers are suspicious of that because they don't know where that money comes from. They don't know if that money's real. They just don't know, like, how realistic this all is.
Yeah. Okay. And I've had instances where someone discloses, I have relatives, and she gets denied. And another person says, I have relatives, or the person fails to disclose and she gets denied. So, is it true that having relatives in the US hurts your visa chances?
No, it depends. If you hide it, it definitely hurts your chances. If so, and really, it just depends on the officer, the day, the time. but but basically, it's sort of like this. If you go to, let's say that you're like, I'm applying to go to Furman, right? And which is University of South Carolina. And I'm like, okay. And that's like, well, my brother went to Furman and my sister went to Furman, and they're literally both living now in America. That's going to be hard, right? So if your relative came to America on the same visa you're applying to
Mm-hmm.
and stayed in America, it's going to be very hard for an officer to justify giving you a visa, right? If your family member basically abused the visa, um, or you're not even abused the visa, but certainly like you went to America on a path, and it's like, oh, that seems funny because it seems like you're trying to do the same exact thing. That can be harmful or detrimental to your case. But I think that's when it becomes like kind of like iffy, right? It really does
Mm-hmm.
depend on the circumstances, on what your family, like how your family came to the country.
Yeah. So if it's an F1, if let's say your sibling gets to the US on F1, and then after
Hmm.
after the program he decides to stay, then if you also
Hmm.
come in with an F1, then it becomes more risky.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Mm.
If the path that they did is seemingly the path that you're doing, an officer is going to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I know you've spoken about the fact that your documents don't really matter. You don't have to hide behind your documents. But for
Mhm.
students who really don't have any funding, or students who have to show proof of funding, um,
Mhm.
how important are those documents, like your financial statements, and what really counts as strong? Is it your own personal statement, or a personal statement from a mom or dad, or a relative or a friend? Which one has more
Um,
weight?
we'll always say a relative or a friend, but the thing is, if you don't have a strong case, then you just don't have a strong case, and maybe you shouldn't go to America, right? I think that people have to understand that the desire and the dream of going to America doesn't always necessarily match the reality. And
Yeah.
if you can't afford it and you're not going there to actually study, then you shouldn't go to America. There's lots of other countries in the world and other things you can do with that money, right? And so I think that's the first thing is like, do you actually qualify for this visa? Are you actually going to do what the law permits on this visa? And if
Mm-hmm.
not, then you shouldn't do that.
Okay. And I know there are a couple of people who use visa agents or do it solo. Is it better to use an agent or to go solo?
You should talk to Argo and a visa officer and someone who's going to give you an honest opinion and honest
Okay.
feedback. There are
Hmm.
many people who apply for visas who are just not qualified,
Yeah.
right? Not everybody should get a visa to go to America. America has certain laws and rules and provisions, and those laws have to be followed. And if you don't qualify, then you just don't qualify, and that's okay. Um, Maybe you can qualify later in life, right? And
Hmm.
so,
Yeah.
whoever you use, whether it's yourself or an agent, you make sure they're honest with you. You make sure that they're telling you the truth
Hmm.
about your qualifications or lack thereof.
Okay. The other misconception. I mean, now I can't say it's misconception anymore because we got the news yesterday. But prior to yesterday, like if let's say an officer was interviewing you back in 2023, do they look up your
Hmm.
social media or online presence?
Oh yeah, we always did. That's the funny thing about all this stuff is that everyone is like, "Oh my God, Trump's looking up all of our stuff." We were doing that back when I was an officer. We were doing that during the Obama administration, right? Like I remember when I was in Nigeria. Maybe Nigeria is not a good example, but certainly when I was in Nigeria, we looked at everyone's social media profiles. In fact, what I used to do is that during the marriage cases, when some Nigerian boy was marrying some American girl, I'd look on their Facebook. Then I'd see that they're still single on their Facebook, or I'd see they're like holding someone else's hand on Facebook, and I'm like, "Hey, excuse me, sir. It says you're married to so and so, but on your Facebook, you're single, or your
Yes,
Facebook, you
okay.
got like your arms. Like, what's going on here?" See, I did that stuff all the time, and officers always did that stuff. Or even like when people would tell me, "Oh, I'm in a relationship." Yeah, I was like, "Show me your Facebook. Show me that they're on your social media site." So yeah, officers do this stuff all the time, and now it's just that it's getting more attention. But that's an old trick of the trade that officers used to do.
Okay, that's good to know. Um,
And
so
but
if
the point would be that be very careful what you post on your social media,
yeah,
because you
yeah.
don't know what that officer is going to do. You don't know what the officer is going to think. And if you're saying that you're married but you're dating someone else, you probably shouldn't be posting that on Facebook.
Okay. So if you're sponsored by a relative or a third party, is that a problem
For the
for
student
student
visa,
visas? Yes.
no, I don't think it's a problem. I think it makes sense, and most officers understand it and are okay with that.
Okay. Does scheduling interviews outside your home country affect your chances? I know, like, there've been instances where uh, students from Ghana, because they are not getting interview dates, go to, for example, Ivory Coast or even all the way to South Africa. Um,
Mhm.
does that increase your chances or diminish your chances?
It used to be when I was an officer, there was far less of a chance of getting a visa if you did that. Nowadays, it's okay. I think that most understand that it's difficult to find a location that has like a visa on that's ready. So most officers are sympathetic to it, and if the officers allow for third country nationals, then it's okay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there like let's say a standard process or some kind of checklist that the
Mhm.
visa officers go through as they are interviewing you to make sure like you check all the boxes, or there's nothing like
Um,
that?
No, not really. I mean, I think the biggest boxes, like I said, are, do you have a valid reason for going to America to study? Can you pay for it? And do you have a plan to return to your home country? Those are the three big things that officers care about.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I want us to talk briefly about uh, BDV Solutions and Argo Visa. So
Hmm.
what kind of services do you provide? And how can students or people who are looking for other visas reach out?
Yeah, so BDV itself does J visas, which are the intern train exchange visas for teachers and for intern trainees. We do H-2B visas, and we do EB-3 unskilled for people wanting to live and live and work in the U.S. on a permanent basis. And for our students, we give you a 30-minute or 60-minute consultation with a former visa officer, someone like me who can tell you, what's the real story behind either an issuance or denial, or why you might be denied by the visa officer.
Okay. So, if for example people want to reach out before they even go for the interview, or they've gone for their first interview, it didn't work out, and they want
Hmm.
to reach out, where would be the
Right.
best place to reach out?
Argovisa.com.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
Um, well, thank you so much for making the time. I think we've
No problem.
exhausted most of
Yeah,
the
we've covered
questions.
everything. We've covered everything.
Yes, we've exhausted most of the questions. Thank you so much. Any last words for uh, prospective applicants?
Just be honest with yourself. Be honest, and if you follow the law and you're honest about the visa process and interview, you should be fine.